everybody, today we will be making these cute 5-inch little Vietnamese baguettes for banh mi. As you can see, what we're looking for is a crispy, crunchy outer shell. This is a signature texture of the Vietnamese banh mi. The inside will be soft, fluffy, and chewy all at the same time, creating a deliciously well-balanced bite between chewy textures and crispy, crunchy textures. We will be creating this spiral inside of the banh mi by rolling the dough before the final rise. Look how fluffy the banh mi is. You can see all the little bubbles inside of the banh mi. You can see the stretch that it has, creating that nice soft chew. To make our banh mi today, you will need the following ingredients. You will also need specific equipment in order to make your banh mi. A baking pan for bread, a sheet pan for hot water, a spray bottle with water, vegetable oil, and a mixing bowl. Let's get started. So in this mixing bowl, I will be mixing all my ingredients together. I'm going to be using this bread machine instant yeast to make my banh mi today because it does not require me to activate the yeast first, which will save me time. And I will be using a dough hook to mix my bread dough today. Let's add 3.5 cups of bread flour to our bowl. Make sure you are leveling the top of your measuring cup. Since we are not measuring by grams, it is more likely that we can be off by a few grams here and there, which would make our dough either too wet or too dry. So it is very important that you level off your measuring cups when picking up the flour. This will help minimize any error. To our mixing bowl, we will add plain table salt. You will need 1.5 teaspoons of this. Make sure that you place it in an area away from where you will be adding the yeast. Salt can deactivate the yeast if placed together before we begin to mix the flour. Next, we will add 2 teaspoons of sugar. And yes, that is an old ice cream container that I have washed and am reusing. I love reusing stuff and not wasting or adding to landfill, especially plastic. And I think it's a really cute container, so why not, right? We will now add 1 tablespoon of yeast to our dry mixture. I'm going to put it away from the salt so that it doesn't get deactivated before we begin mixing all our dry ingredients. So remember, keep all the ingredients separate, the salt, the sugar, and the yeast from one another. It is important because the salt deactivates while the sugar activates the yeast. Now we will begin to mix all of our dry ingredients together evenly as much as possible before we add in our liquid ingredient. So let's attach our dough hook and begin mixing up the yeast, the salt, and the sugar and flour. Even if you don't have a stand mixer, you can certainly still make this bread. In your mixing bowl, whisk together all the dry ingredients so that they're well distributed. When the dry ingredients are well incorporated, begin to add 1.5 cups of water to the dry ingredients slowly, a little bit at a time, and mixing after adding a little bit of water each time. You may or may not use the entire 1.5 cups of water. Some days the dough can be drier, some days the dough can be wetter. It just depends. I find that on cooler days I have to add a little bit more water, and on warmer days I have to add a little less water. Temperature and humidity definitely plays a part in baking, and it changes the outcome and affects the dough's properties. It looks like my dough is a bit on the drier side today. I want to make sure that it is actually dry and not just still trying to bind together. So I'm going to let it go and mix and do its thing for a little bit longer. And if I feel that it's not quite there, it's not binding together, it doesn't want to seem to form a dough, a ball, then I will add a teaspoon of water to my mixture. Okay, so it's been mixing for a while and it still hasn't come together. It's definitely dry. I'm going to add a teaspoon of water to my dough to help it bind together a little bit better. We don't want to add too much all at once because then you'll end up with a sticky mess. Also, don't forget we have 2 tablespoons of fat that we're adding to the dough. So there's more liquid coming to our mixture. The recipe is flexible and you can use either butter, olive oil, or vegetable oil as the fat. When we add the fat, we're going to turn on the stir setting off and on to slowly incorporate the dough and the fat together. If you start off stirring without any stop and go motion, you're going to have butter flying everywhere. So take your time, stir it slowly, let it incorporate itself a little bit better before you speed it up. While you're mixing the fat into the dough, it's going to look a little weird. It will take some time for the dough to come together and bind with the fat. Keep kneading the dough until it does not slide easily off the dough hook, like mine. This indicates that you have built enough gluten in your dough for a very well structured bread. This means we will have a airy and chewy textured bread. You can also check by doing a window pane test by stretching the dough and seeing if it tears easily or if it gives you a little resistance. If the stretch feels nice and strong and sturdy, you have built enough gluten in your bread. Good job! After a good amount of gluten has been built, we're going to form a smooth ball or something close to a smooth ball by pulling the sides from the top down to the bottom and pinching it together. Once you have formed a somewhat good looking ball, add oil to your bowl and rub oil all around the dough to keep it from drying out and forming a hard skin. After oiling our dough and our bowl, we will let the dough rest and rise to 2.5 times its original size in a warm place. My dough will be resting in my sunroom because it is the warmest place in my house. Using cling wrap, tightly wrap up the mixing bowl, and on top of the cling wrap, add a dish towel to help keep the heat in. As the yeast is working, it's going to not only make the dough rise, it's going to build up some heat. And we definitely want to keep that heat in there so that our dough can rise quickly and properly. Place the dough in the warmest part of your house. It will take anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour and a half for the dough to rise depending on the temperature of your house. It's turning out to be a hotter day in my city, so my dough rises really quickly. It's time to deflate the dough and begin to shape our bread for our second proofing. Gently remove the dough from the bowl and form a smooth ball. Using the same method as before, pulling from the top down to the base and then pinching the base together. The reason why we're doing this is because we're trying to create a smooth surface for our banh mi. Before we section this into 8 pieces, we need to form a smooth outer layer. This outer layer will become our crispy, crunchy, thin crust on the banh mi. Try to make the dough as even as possible. We're eyeballing our dough and cutting it into 8 pieces. You can weigh out your dough so that they are evenly distributed by grams. I like to eyeball because I don't mind the bread looking a little bit rustic and handmade. And I find that if I eyeball it and make sure that the shape of the bread is similar in sizes, the bread isn't that off from one another after it's baked. I also realized that not everybody owns a scale to weigh their ingredients, so it's not feasible to always ask everyone to weigh their ingredients. Keep cutting your dough in half until you have 8 wedges. Don't roll your dough, just leave the wedges as is. We're going to use it to our advantage. I'm going to keep cutting to finish up my wedges. You don't need to cover them up. They can sit out and dry out a little bit from the air. We're going to create a shell for our bread. Now that we have our 8 wedges, let's begin to roll it into our mini banh mi shape. Remember our crust that we created? We're going to be flattening that part of the dough and keeping the airy part in between. Stretch your dough out till it looks like a slice of pizza. You can also use a rolling pin to help you stretch it out a little bit more. The reason why we're doing this is because we're going to roll it up like an inverted croissant. The shaping process will give us that beautiful spiral inside of our banh mi and create a nice chewy, tender texture in the middle of our banh mi. Begin rolling the narrow end tightly towards the wider end of the dough. Pinch together the seam and the sides, making sure that it's nice and tight and secure. Once your dough is pinched and secure, begin to roll the dough back and forth using both hands, putting more pressures on the end and less on the center to create that classic shape of the banh mi where it's chubbier in the middle and narrower at the ends. I'm going to finish rolling up all my wedges and making sure that all the seams are tightly secure and the shape are similar to one another. Alright, last one, and then we're ready to proof our dough for the second and final time. There are 2 things we need to do before we set the dough aside to proof for the final time. Spray the outside of the dough with water to soften the shell that has formed while we were working. Once it's softened, we're going to apply vegetable oil onto the dough. This will keep the dough soft on the outside and allow the proofing to happen. If there's a hard shell that's formed and there's no moisture to allow the bread to grow, it won't grow. If there's a dry, hard shell on the outside of your dough, the yeast cannot work its magic. So make sure that each dough is very well moistened before the second proofing. For the final and second proofing, I'm going to be proofing in my oven with some hot water. Before we add the hot water and the bread dough, we're going to need to readjust our oven a little bit. I'm moving the pan to the bottom of the shelf and making sure that there's a center shelf ready for my bread dough. Spray the individual bread dough one more time with water before putting into the oven for the second final proofing. This will ensure that that hard shell that formed while we were working is no longer there, and the bread can now grow again during the second proofing. The steam from the hot water will keep the outer layer of the bread moist. It will also help the yeast grow a lot faster than if I were to sit it outside. 10 minutes have passed. I went to check to see where my bread is at. Great, I see signs of fermentation. The dough is rising. I'm going to let it proof for 20 more minutes. Guys, look at that. It has risen so much. They are so cute and fluffy. It's time to remove them from the oven and begin our preheating so that we can get this oven hot enough to bake our bread. While the oven is preheating, we are going to spray the buns with more water. This will allow us a better surface to create the classic slit on the banh mi. To create the slit on the banh mi, you'll need a very sharp knife or a razor. I don't have a razor, so I'm going to be using my very large sharp knife. We'll be creating the slits using a 45-degree angle. This will give us a nice split in the middle of the bread. Start from one end and end on the opposite side. If your angle isn't at 45 degrees, it won't create that split. So we'll have to go in again and angle the knife more to create an opening for our split to form. I'm always nervous about cutting it too deep, so I'll go in lightly and then go in one more time until I get the depth that I need to create the beautiful center that the banh mi has. I also wait for the slit to do its thing. If it doesn't seem to be opening or splitting apart, then I'll go in again. You can always go back in with a knife to slit the bread more, but you can't take away a deep slit. So I say take it slow so that there's no regrets. After you've created a few slits, spray the center of the slit with water. This will allow that center to rise and spread the bread more. Oh, I forgot to mention that the pan with the water will stay inside of the oven to help make that crispy crust that we all love on the banh mi. During the last 10 minutes of baking, you'll need to remove the water pan so that the bread can turn golden brown. Now that I'm done creating slits in my bread, I'm going to do a final spray before it goes into the oven for baking. Whenever I'm making bread, I feel really proud of myself if the dough rises properly. And you should too. It's such a huge accomplishment. Baking bread isn't easy, but it does get easier with practice and you build your confidence so much. These beautiful babies are going to go into the oven at 415 for 22 to 25 minutes. My bread has been baking for 22 minutes. They are done, golden brown on the outside. The middle has rise and split beautifully. I'm now going to brush some butter on top to give it a nice shiny sheen. You don't need very much melted butter. Half a tablespoon will do. Guys, I'm so happy with the way my bread came out. They are so cute and perfect. I'm just going to finish buttering them up before I split one open to check out the inside. Let's take a closer look at the outside of the bread. We have a beautiful split in the middle, a shiny sheen from the butter. Let's look at the bottom, a nice hearty bottom. I'm so proud of these and I can't stop looking at them. I also can't wait to bite into them. As you can see, after they've baked, they aren't that different in sizes. Alright, let's crack one open to see what it looks like inside. First, on the outside, you can hear how nice the crust has baked. Let's tear into this little guy. Watch the stretch. See that gluten? Oh wow, look at how tender the inside looks. And you can see that spiral from when we rolled it. The gluten has great structure, and you can clearly see the spiral happening. Let's do the squish test. Will it bounce back? And yes, it does. We have a nice bounce. That means our bread is soft and tender, but yet chewy at the same time. I can't wait to sink my teeth into this. Look at that stretch. This baguette is so great because you can eat it with anything. You can make a sandwich out of it, or eat it with some beef stew, or a big bowl of chicken curry. Today, I'm going to use them to make a sandwich, a Vietnamese sandwich called Banh. I'm going to use a serrated knife to cut my bread in half. Inside of the Banh, I will be using this 20-hour smoked pork shoulder that my husband cooked. We season the shoulder with a little bit of salt, black pepper, garlic powder, and paprika. I will be using a lot of typical ingredients that's used in the Banh. So today I have cucumbers, cilantro. These are nice fresh ingredients that will complement the meat and add flavor to the banh. My good friend V gave me this pate from France. I will be using it as part of my spread on the inside of my banh. In addition, I will be using pickled jalapenos that I made, along with some pickled carrots and daikon. I always make pickled vegetables and have it ready to go in my refrigerator all year long. The pickled vegetable and jalapenos are great because they go so well with so many dishes. I'm also using a Japanese mayo in my sandwich today to add flavor to the banh. And a lady's gotta have her heat, so I will be adding sriracha to my sandwich. Let's cut this bad boy open. I can't wait to see the texture that's inside of the bread. Oh, do you guys hear the sound on the bread as I'm cutting? It sounds so crispy. Oh my goodness, it's gorgeous inside. Okay, this next part is for everybody who doesn't know what banh is. We're going to begin layering it with some mayo. And to this, I will be adding that pate I showed you earlier. I'm going to spread it thinly on the opposite side of the mayo. The pate adds a nice, rich, creamy flavor to the banh. I think pate is an acquired taste, and not everyone will enjoy it. So if you don't like pate, you don't need to add it to your banh. I really love pate and foie gras, so I'm gonna be adding a little extra to my sandwich today. Don't judge me. I really enjoy my flavor and my foods. Maybe just a little more pate. Now that I've got my base all set to go, I'm going to be adding the rest of my ingredients to my banh to create the perfect bite. Food is one of those things that we get to enjoy in our life, and I feel that it should also look beautiful because we truly eat with our sense of smell and our sense of sight. before we even get to taste the food. And if the food looks more appealing, it will taste even better. Alright guys, the banh mi is done. Look how gorgeous it looks. The bread is nice and strong, but yet soft, tender, and chewy. It can hold all this filling so that I get to have my perfect bite between savory, sweet, and tangy, spicy flavors. Thank you for joining me in making Vietnamese baguette. I hope that this video has been inspiring and encouraging for you to be the master chefs in your own home. For this recipe and many more, visit www.deanathai.com and follow on IG at lifestyles_with_Deana for updates.